Chapter 3: Slavery and the South. In 1929, when Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta, Georgia, most black people in America live in the South. In fact, 9 out of every 10 African Americans live in the South. In every way, their lives were worse than the lives of Southern whites. They were poor, they lived in worse houses, their lives were shorter. Most blacks in the South could not vote. Some black people who were alive in 1929 had been slaves. They had belonged to their white owners, and they were treated like things, not people. White people could buy and sell slaves just like houses or land. In the past, many countries have used slaves. Hundreds of years ago, they were slaves in Rome and Athens. They worked on farms in the houses of rich people, but they were not slaves forever. After some years, they became free men and women again. But in North and South America, slavery was different. In the 16th century, people from European countries like Britain, Spain, and Portugal began to move into North and South America. They could then forest and clear the land for farms. They needed men and women to work on their farms. Where could they find them? The answer was Africa. Men and women were taken from their homes in Africa and brought to North and South America to work on farms and on roads. From about 1500 to 1850, European ships took at least 10 million men and women from Africa to become slaves in the Americas. The ships were very full, and the men and women did not have enough food, water, or air. Hundreds of thousands of Africans never reached America. They died on these slave ships. When African slaves arrived in America, they were sold to white farmers. Often people from the same family were sold to different owners and never saw each other again. Husbands lost their wives and children were taken away from their mothers. In the south of the United States, the farms were very big. The farmers usually grew sugar or cotton, and they needed slaves to do the hard work in the fields. The white farmers gave the slave food, clothes, and houses, but the slave had to stay on the farm. They belonged to the farmer. When slaves ran away, they were usually caught and brought back to their owners. Then they were beaten and sometimes even killed. Many slaves fought against the slave owners. In 1791, a black slave called Toussaint Louverture led an army of slaves against French soldiers in the islands of Haiti. Toussaint died in a French prison, but in 1804, Haiti became the first free black country. In Virginia, in 1831, a slave called Narrated led the slaves against their white owners. They did not success and Turner himself was killed, but the slave owners were afraid that one day the slaves would win the fight. Some black leaders wanted to return to Africa. In 1822, a new country was born in West Africa. This was Liberia, a country for people who were once slaves but were now free. 100 years later, African American leaders such as W. E. B. Du Bois argued for a return to Africa. After 1808, it was against the law to bring slaves from America to the United States, but the numbers of slaves in the South continued to grow. By 1860, there were more than 4 million slaves in the South. They were no longer Africans but African Americans, and they wanted to be free. When Americans wrote the Declaration of Independence, In 1776, they said that men and women should be free and equal, but the men who wrote the Declaration owned slaves. How was this possible? This was a difficult question. By the 19th century, many black people had become Christians. They went to church on Sunday, just like their white owners. Blacks and whites both read the Bible, and the message of the Bible was the same. All men and women, black and white, are equal in God's eyes. More and more people in Europe and America thought that slavery was wrong. Britain ended the buying and selling of slaves in 1807. A year later, America did the same. Many northern states ended slavery, and they wanted it to stop all over the United States. But southern slave owners wanted to keep their slaves. They returned to free them, and they were ready to fight for their rights to own slaves. The southern states were ready to go to war for these rights. Chapter number 4, War in America and After. Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States in 1860. He wanted to end slavery in America, but the South wanted to keep their slaves. So even southern states decided to leave the United States of America. The North and South went to war in 1861. More than 180,000 black soldiers fought for the North. In 5 years of terrible fighting, more than half a billion soldiers on both sides were killed. The North won the war, and slavery in the South ended in 1865. Now there were no more black slaves in America, but black people in the South did not have the same rights as white people. Blacks could not go to white schools, and there were very few schools for blacks. Blacks could not go to the same shops or restaurants as whites. When blacks did try to get their rights, whites often answered them with violence. Most whites in the South were angry that they had to lose the war. They did not agree with the end of slavery or with equal rights for blacks. In 1867, a group of soldiers in the southern state of Georgia started a secret organization to fight against black rights. This organization was called the Ku Klux Klan. They wanted to frighten blacks and stop them from voting in elections. Klansmen dressed in white clothes and covered their faces so nobody could see who they were. Sometimes they took black people out of their homes and beat them or killed them. They also burned the schools, homes, and churches of black people. In the 1890s, more than 1,000 blacks were killed by whites in the South. Most blacks were too frightened to tell the police because many policemen in the South actually belonged to the Klan. Early in the 20th century, more than 4 billion whites belonged to the Ku Klux Klan. Now that blacks were not slaves, they were free to move out to the South. Thousands of blacks left the South and moved to northern cities like Chicago and Detroit. There was more freedom for blacks in the North, and there was work for them in the factories. By the beginning of the 20th century, a quarter of blacks lived outside the South, mostly in big northern cities. In the 20th century, blacks began to play a more important part in the life of America. New schools and universities for blacks opened. Jazz, the music of black people, became popular all over the world. Harlem, a black neighborhood of New York City, became the center of black musicians like Duane and black writers like Langston Hughes. Paul Robeson was a famous black singer and actor. He sang about the trouble of black people. But many whites were angry when he appears in Shakespeare's play Othello with a white actress as his wife. There were many black sportsmen. The great black runner Chase Owens won gold medals for America in the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. As Hitler and other Nazi leaders watched, Owens beat the best white runners. The boxer Joe Louis was born in a poor black family in Alabama in 1914 and was taken to Detroit when he was 10 years old. In 1937, he became the world boxing champion. His British fight was against a German boxer, Max Schmeling. Louis had lost to Schmeling in their first fight. When Schmeling returned to Germany, he was called a hero by the Nazis. Hitler himself said that because Schmeling had won, whites were stronger than blacks. When Louis beat Schmeling in 1938, blacks all over America were wildly happy. Joe Louis fought 20 times as world champion and was never beaten. But once again, the greatest changes in the lives of black people came from a war. In 1941, America entered the Second World War. Black soldiers fought bravely for their country, but the American army was segregated. Black soldiers did not fight beside white soldiers, and they were not treated as well as white soldiers. When black soldiers protested about this, they were often fights between black soldiers and white soldiers. When these black soldiers returned to America, they wanted equal rights for themselves. In some of the countries they had visited, black people had the same rights as white people and were treated fairly. After the war ended, more blacks moved to the north and became richer. Some things got better. Black workers in 1950 were paid twice as much as black workers in 1840, and more blacks began to go to university, but black Americans got much less money than white Americans, even when they were doing the same jobs. Many fewer blacks than whites went to university, and even in the North there was still the problem of racism. The Second World War had ended a war against racist ideas. Many whites in America realized that their own country was racist. Blacks began to vote, and white politicians began to listen to them. In 1948, President Truman ended segregation in the army. In 1954, a new law said that blacks and whites must go to the same school and learn together. Things were getting better for black people, but they wanted more. They were ready for someone to lead them towards creative freedoms. They were ready for Martin Luther King.